Welcome to the Global Missions Podcast, a program for Christ followers who want to participate more effectively in God's work, both at home and to the ends of the earth. Visit us at globalmissionspodcast.com to find show notes, resources, and previous episodes, or to suggest a particular topic or guest you would like to hear featured on the program. You can also engage with us through Twitter and Facebook. We would love to hear from you. And now, here's your host, Rob Magwood, better known to his friends as Mags.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of the Global Missions Podcast. Today we'll be talking about one of the potentially big and daunting topics when it comes to serving in missions, support raising. We've got a great interview with practical ideas from an author, Heather Ricks, as she helps us connect good storytelling with financial support raising. Before we get to the interview, we'd like to share with you this resource.
What is happening to Europe today? A huge influx of refugees and a rise in terrorist events are creating confusion and insecurity. Years of aggressive secularization have left most Europeans without any solid spiritual foundation to face this situation. But God is still at work in Europe. Great challenges open up great opportunities for the followers of Jesus to provide hope and peace through their actions and the message of the Prince of Peace. To learn more about opportunities to serve in Europe through Greater Europe Mission, or GEM, visit the website www.gemmission.org. And now, here's today's interview.
Hi, everyone. Our guest for today's interview is Heather Ricks. Heather, together with her husband Jason, has been raising support for ministry roles for nearly 20 years. And since returning from Ghana in West Africa, she has been using her experience to help train mission workers in support raising as they prepare for ministry. She teaches people how to share their stories, in particular, that'll be a key theme today, in order to create an atmosphere of worship that invites them to participate in God's work here and around the world. She's published a book called God and Elephants, a worshiper's guide to raising support. Heather, good afternoon and welcome to the program.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Looking forward to our discussion today. When we get to this topic, it's a really important topic for mission workers, of course, and sometimes one of the more daunting parts of doing global missions work, support raising. And that can include raising up prayer support and particularly raising up financial support as well. And in our Western culture, because we're often taught to be independent, this can make people uncomfortable a bit. Looking forward to talking with you, Heather, just to put some other ideas into this and really turn it Godward. So just tell us very quickly about yourself. You live where now and with whom?
I live in Laramie, Wyoming with my husband, Jason.
And how long have you been back in Wyoming?
We have been back for a year and a half now.
If you have a chance to read Heather's book, you're going to learn that there was another season of their lives in ministry in Wyoming as well. I'll leave that to the book, though. But it is a kind of a coming back again in that part of the story, right?
Yes, it sure is.
Now, this book that you have written, God and Elephants, A Worshipper's Guide to Fundraising. When did you write it, and why did you step toward this idea?
I wrote it several years ago because I used to train missionaries how to raise support. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that kept coming up as people were raising support is they had difficulty always sharing their story. They would tell me their story. However, when they got into fundraising conversations, it would all be about money because they didn't know how to actually put their story into a conversation. So that's what kind of led me to the idea of putting it into a fundraising book, is teaching people how to tell their stories in order for God to be worshiped and glorified during the support raising conversations.
Mm-hmm. And I would add here, I visited our personnel department, and actually Heather's book is required reading for all the appointees that are going out through our organization, Send Canada, and they have found it very helpful. It's not exactly a training course, I wouldn't call it that, or a curriculum. It's filled with lots of practical examples and stories and even exercises to invite those who are raising support, either for the first time or veterans, to improve their communications. Heather, you've got this tagline, worship-focused support raising. Would you just take a minute and unpack what you mean by that focus?
Yes. Well, most people, when they think of raising support, they think of money, which is obviously the need, and you have to have money to get where you need to go.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, we focus all our efforts and attention on developing techniques with the goal of getting money as quickly as possible. But viewed in this respect, raising support is often just seen as a task, something to hurry up and get done in order to be used by God. Now, there's nothing wrong with getting money quickly. In fact, I pray that for everyone on this journey to experience that blessing. However, I believe there's a much deeper purpose for raising support that has the potential of being overlooked if everything is developed around money. Mm-hmm. What's missing in the money-centered scenario is the fact that we are created to worship God and give him the glory in everything that we do. And that's not just a suggestion. We are commanded to do that. Like in 1 Corinthians 10:31, it says, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God." And that verse includes fundraising. That means this should be our focus, and money is the outcome of our worship to him. This changes the way most people think about raising support. When people are consumed with the pressure of raising money, this can crush them. So we need soul care that only God's truth can provide. In a worship-focused atmosphere, we trust that God is our true provider who has all our needs in his care. When God calls us to be obedient to him, he's the author of our journey. Therefore, we shouldn't operate out of panic or not having enough money or out of the fear that we aren't going to make it in time. He asks us to operate out of trust, even if we don't know what lies ahead. This frees you up to look at this journey from a whole different perspective. Because this journey is God ordained, that means it's not a mistake, and it also has a purpose. So it's uniquely set up for both the asker and the giver to worship God from beginning to end. Most people will be on support for the life of their ministry. That means the support raising journey goes beyond the initial thrust to get to the field. Therefore, it has the potential to be a continual act of worship. It's because of this I teach those on the support raising journey to be worship leaders as they guide others into worship of what God is doing here and around the world. So from the beginning, I help people to discover their God stories and worship him. And out of this worship, they in turn are able to share the stories of what God is doing so others will worship God and want to join him in what he is doing. Worship then becomes the foundation that everything is built upon, and it continues on throughout the life of the ministry. And that's the reason why I emphasize support raising as being worship-centered instead of it just being about money.
Right. Well, in reading through the book over the last week or so, it's been an encouragement to me, if I could say a veteran. I have done it before, and in fact, Kath and I have been the grateful recipients of supporters for over 20 years ourselves. So I see it as being valuable for those doing it for the first time, but also healthy and helpful reminders for those of us that have done it for sometimes an extended period of time. You really zoom in on the idea of storytelling. Let's go to that. Why is storytelling so important when we are raising up support, either prayer supporters or perhaps in particular financial supporters?
Yes. Well, the beautiful thing about a good story is that by the time you get to the end of it, the stage has been set through the details, setting, the plot line, and all the other elements in order for you to know the heart of the main character. Mm-hmm. Now, when putting the idea of storytelling into the context of raising support, I want to read 2 Corinthians 3:18 for you. It says, "And we who with unveiled faces all reflect the Lord's glory are being transformed into his likeness with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord who is the Spirit." This verse tells us that because of God's mercy, our lives are being molded by God to reflect his glory. That is our ministry to the world. With the support raising journey being a part of that ministry, God's glory needs to be reflected as we are the light of the world. He is the main character in everything we do. Right. And the support raising journey offers the perfect opportunity for people to intimately discover his beauty. Each person on this journey holds the key to discovery for others to know God's heart and character. And stories are important as they help to paint the picture of what God is doing in each individual's life and the work he is doing throughout the world. We are certainly called to be a reflection of God's glory to those God has sent us to serve, But what about the people back home? How do they discover the God of the nations? Stories become the connecting piece, so to speak, from what the missionaries see God doing and how they experience God in the place where they are serving. They bring those God encounters to life for your audiences so they too can experience God. That is why it's so important to understand the role of being a worship leader, as the missionary has the means to be the eyes and ears for his or her supporters, families, and friends back home. And the amazing thing about the support raising journey is that it's already set up for storytelling. If you look at it as a whole, God has guided the journey so that his greatness has the opportunity to continually be on display. During the initial support raising process, the missionary has the advantage of many different settings and audiences, like one-on-one conversations, talking to small group gatherings, and even when they have chances to speak in front of congregations and mission boards. Then after the missionary gets to his ministry destination, then they have prayer letters and blogs and other speaking engagements. These are amazing avenues that God has already given to us for people to see and understand the heart of God. The thing is, if the support raising journey is just used as steps to get money and stay funded, then conversations become only about money and prayer letters are reduced to business reports and family happenings. The chance to truly discover God's work among the nations is reduced, and it becomes all about us. However, stories have the power to change missions, and the support raising journey is the perfect avenue for this to happen.
So if we agree that we would like to have a worship focus, and I love the way you said that God is the main character of this story, because sometimes I wonder if you agree, we might tend to make ourselves or someone in the story the main character, as opposed to God receiving the glory. Am I understanding you right?
Yes. So often we do that.
And it's a natural tendency in some cases. And Heather has some great examples in the book where she, can I say, Heather, you kind of wrote like a version A, which is self-centered, and then a version B of the same story, which is more God-centered. That was particularly insightful, I thought, as you illustrated what you mean by God being the main character in the story. So then, would you describe for us what it looks like to use storytelling in support raising? Just summarize that for us, please.
Yeah, I really want people to understand why they are there. So I have them go through the question, why are you here? And have them look back to see all the amazing things that God has already been doing in their life. And then I take those amazing things and mold them into their God stories, so to speak, so that those things are the focus of the support raising conversations. Like for instance, I teach them how to use a hook to draw the audience into the story. I also use the facts, and I show them how to weave a story with one central theme, with the different supporting characters and the details. Because that way, God is the one who is seen and not them, because so often we stand in the way of what God is doing.
So when you use the term hook, what do you mean by that?
It's a word or phrase that immediately draws the audience into the story.
It starts it off. And it doesn't mean that you don't include facts in a story, right? There is data and there is accurate information throughout a story, obviously.
Most certainly. You want to stick to the facts because you don't want to make up stuff, because obviously God gave you those things to use, but you want to create it in an environment of a story.
And one of your points that I appreciated, you mentioned a minute ago, is one theme. It takes a certain type of discipline to stay on one theme in a story.
It does, because so often we try to cram our entire life story into like a 5-minute setting. And you really need to stick to one thing that God is doing and build that story around that thing so people can see what God is doing in that moment.
I thought that was a great encouragement to a reader, that you will actually have to omit great material sometimes because it doesn't relate to your one theme.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, this is helpful, and just to illustrate, there's some really practical ideas in the book as well. Why do you think it's so hard for us to stop telling the what instead of why in our stories?
Well, if you look at social media, you can already see how short our attention spans are. We just instantly give a quick blurb to an audience that just it doesn't show the meaning of what's going on at all. And in some cases, that's okay. But in other things, like when you want to be a worship leader, you really need to expand on the idea. So I think that people just get stuck with this quick idea of shooting something out.
Mm-hmm. The idea of social media and the hook, how do those relate to each other?
Well, I think in a story with the hook, I try to teach people to draw their attention immediately to God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in social media settings, it's all about us. And I'm not saying that you can't use God, but I think we have such a self-focused mindset when we're using social media that we tend to focus on ourselves in that. So that's the difference between the hook, is that I'm really trying to get them to use it to immediately draw their attention to God.
Mm-hmm. I wondered about the brevity. We talked about something in front that attracts attention, and as a hook, and then if social media could help serve that purpose, but it's actually drawing to another source, whether it's a blog or a personal presentation, where more of that story comes as well.
Yes.
If we get to practical advice, and we think of a listener who may be a worker preparing to go out and serve in missions, maybe they've raised support before, or perhaps it's the first time. What practical advice would you give to those workers?
I think hands down, I would really tell people to use this time that God has given them to prepare their hearts for the field. Like really slowing down and seeing God throughout this process. That's something that tends to go to the wayside in the rush of things. Like, for instance, you have the chaos of meeting with people and raising funds and getting everything in order, all while saying goodbye to friends and family. And that's just a whole lot of stuff to think about. But I really think that soul care is needed because this is a precious time that God has given us to really focus on Him and to see what He is doing. God is sovereign. God is good. God is faithful. And we see those things come to life in the support raising journey as we are taking a step of faith.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's good advice. I wonder if we change our audience for just a moment and say it's a pastor or a missions committee or a team of people in a church who would like to be supportive of those workers. What advice or principles do you have to offer to them as they engage with this story idea?
I really think that it begins with the relationship between the missionary and the mission committee, and whether it's built on trust and accountability. And the reason why I say that is because I think it really begins with the missionary understanding the role that they have as a worship leader, because they are the ones that have the eyes and ears to see the God moments on the field. And the mission committees back home, they can't tell a story if they don't know what it is. They could tell about God and the need for missions, but they are missing the very piece that makes another world come alive for their congregations. Therefore, I think the communication through the prayer letters and all these other updates that we have, the blogs, I think that's vital. Because if not, then the mission committees and the churches back home, they really won't have anything to go on.
I sometimes, in speaking to churches, talk about goers and senders. The goers being those individuals or families who will lay down their lives here and take it up in another place, another culture perhaps, to be God's representatives there. Those are the goers. The senders are those who come around that individual or family and provide for them, equip them, encourage them, and send them to the mission field. And I like to ask churches, as we go about global missions, which is more important, the goers or the senders? And I encourage them not to answer too quickly. And then usually there's this realization, wait a minute, we need both. We really need both. And I like the way you're connecting this, that the worker, the goer, if you will, can communicate back to the senders to invite their continuing engagement and even deepening engagement, even though they might never visit that field personally. They are a critical part of God's work.
Yes. And I think it's so important for the mission committees and the the home churches to really discuss the mission with the missionaries, what they expect from the beginning, so that their relationship is more of a relationship instead of like a business-like relationship. Because I think that gives the missionary the freedom to feel like they can tell the stories instead of just giving a business report of what they've done.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. Well, I'd like to ask you, Heather, about some resources that you would recommend. And here I just want to mention again Heather's book, God and Elephants. And it is, in and of itself, an excellent resource. The last chapter? It was chapter 8, I think, is so full of practical ideas, from how to think about building a prayer team, building lists, how you would go about contacting potential supporters, and goal setting and accountability, and then preparing for those very personal interactions. This is Heather's book, and recommended to you. What other resources would you recommend?
I think for the storytelling aspect, for those who want to dig a little bit deeper, I would recommend Word Painting by Rebecca McClanahan, because she thoroughly takes you through the different elements, from talking about how to make descriptions come alive all the way to developing the plot effectively. But as far as support raising, I would say, because I want to change the paradigm of raising support, I would highly recommend A Spirituality of Fundraising by Henri Nouwen, because he bases the fundraising on ministry. And I think that's so important. Yeah,
excellent recommendation too. These books we will note in the show notes. If you're a regular listener to the podcast, you'll know that on the website you can find the show notes that summarizes the main points we cover in our conversation here, but also the resources that Heather has recommended as well. Now, Heather, you have also recently launched another ministry called Story One. How does that fit together with what we're talking about here?
Well, with my Story One ministry, I obviously want to focus on worship. And since the storytelling aspect of it came in, I really truly believe that stories give us the foundation to worship, because they draw our attention to God. So that's how they kind of combine and come together. That's
good. And if our listeners would like to learn more from you or follow you, how can they learn more from Heather Ricks?
Well, my website is story-one.org, and that's ONE. And my Twitter account is @StoryOneSupport.
Okay. If you'd like to learn more about what Heather is doing and the training that she offers and the material she has, you can follow with her there. I really appreciated, Heather, in reading the book, how you turn the attention back to the main character, that this is the Lord's work. Yes, you affirm that we need to work hard and diligently. Yes. You're careful to say that there is no formula that guarantees raising support in a certain period of time, but that there are, if I could call them best practices, perhaps, you've, in your experience and what you've observed, these are healthy practices.
Yes.
There's a quote that I wanted to finish with here. It's perhaps my favorite quote from the book toward the end. Heather writes this: God is doing a work in your life to prepare you for ministry. The support-raising journey is an act of faith that God uses to transform us into His likeness. And I so appreciated that, Heather, that it is the very act, or the stage, the phase of raising support is also part of our worship and part of our service to our King.
Yes, I truly believe that it is.
Well, thank you for taking some time this afternoon to talk with us and to share these ideas. And we trust that this will be helpful to our listeners. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you so much for having me, you guys. It's my honor.
Well, we hope this episode has stirred your thinking on this important but sometimes daunting topic. Perhaps you know someone that is preparing for missions or getting ready to go from your church that would benefit from hearing this conversation. We want to say thank you for helping us to share it around with those that would benefit from hearing this conversation. Remember, you can find the show notes on our website at globalmissionspodcast.com. That's all for this episode. The Global Missions Podcast is produced by the Jaffrey Centre for Global Initiatives and Send International of Canada in collaboration with other like-minded agencies. on behalf of our entire team, thanks for listening, and we invite you to join us again in 2 weeks when we'll continue to explore this grand adventure of being Christ's witnesses to the ends of the earth.